Captain Lee Hyun could feel the cold metal of the crystalline chair pressing against his back as he stared straight ahead. The massive chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out before him like a giant theater, with hundreds of alien faces, looking down at him from curved balconies that spiraled up toward a domed ceiling. The air hummed with translation devices, turning his words into clicks, whistles, and electronic beeps that each species could understand. On the main viewing screen, holographic images played out the Battle of Vega Station in brutal detail. Hyun watched himself again, 3 months younger but already scarred from previous fights, leading his soldiers through corridors filled with smoke and the screams of dying men. The footage showed Private Kim Do-won crawling forward on his belly, his left leg completely severed below the knee, still firing his rifle at enemy positions. When his weapon ran out of ammunition, Do-won dipped his fingers in his own blood and drew arrows on the wall pointing toward hidden enemy bunkers. The alien counselors made sounds of disgust. Some covered their eyes with tentacles or paws. Others clicked their mandibles in what Hyun had learned was their version of shaking their heads in disapproval. Counselor Veltar of the Cedian Republic stood up slowly, his blue skin shimmering under the chamber lights. His voice carried across the room like a cold wind. Captain Lee Hyun of Earth, we have reviewed 17 hours of combat footage from your recent campaigns. What we see defies all civilized understanding of warfare. The screen changed to show Sergeant Park Min-soo fighting with his right arm hanging useless at his side, the bone clearly broken and sticking out through torn fabric. Instead of retreating to medical stations like any sensible soldier from other species would do, Min-soo switched his rifle to his left hand and kept advancing. When enemy fire pinned down his squad, he used his broken arm as a distraction, waving it to draw enemy attention while his teammates flanked around. Your species fights like rabid animals, Veltar continued, his large black eyes fixed on Hyun. How do you justify such savagery? How do you sleep at night knowing you command soldiers to fight beyond all reason? Around the chamber, representatives from 12 different species murmured among themselves. The Zephyrians clicked their beaks, rapidly, which meant they were extremely uncomfortable. The Centaurian delegates pulled their fur closer around their bodies, a sign of distress. Even the usually calm Andromedans were shifting nervously in their seats. Hyun had been sitting in silence for 4 hours, listening to testimony about human brutality, human recklessness, and human disregard for the accepted rules of galactic warfare. Expert witnesses had explained how other species conducted war with precision and honor. When defeat became mathematically certain, civilized armies surrendered. When casualties reached acceptable levels, commanders called for ceasefires. When soldiers were wounded beyond combat effectiveness, they retired to medical facilities and accepted their fate with dignity. Humans, the experts testified, did none of these things. The prosecutor, a tall insectoid creature called Kexerin, stepped forward with a tablet full of evidence. Captain Lee, military psychologists from 6 different species have studied your combat recordings. They conclude that humanity suffers from a collective mental disorder that prevents your soldiers from recognizing when they should stop fighting. You continue combat operations even when victory is impossible. You sacrifice lives for purely emotional reasons. You fight hardest when you should surrender fastest. Kexerin's compound eyes glittered as he spoke. We have documented cases of human soldiers fighting for days after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate any other species. We have seen humans charge enemy positions while missing limbs, while bleeding to death, while suffering from radiation, poisoning that should have rendered them unconscious. This is not courage, Captain. This is madness. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the translation devices seemed to pause, waiting for Hyun's response. He could feel the weight of hundreds of alien gazes pressing down on him, judging not just him but his entire species. These were representatives of civilizations that had existed for thousands of years before humans ever left Earth. They had fought wars across star systems, built empires that spanned galaxies and developed weapons that could crack planets in half, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to die quietly. Hyun slowly stood up, his uniform still bearing scorch marks from the last battle. His weathered face, crossed with scars from a dozen different conflicts, remained completely calm. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the chamber with quiet authority. We fight like this because surrender means extinction. Your people have the luxury of defeat. When you lose a war, you negotiate terms, pay reparations, maybe lose some territory. When humans lose, we disappear forever. Our children become slaves. Our culture gets erased. Our planet becomes someone else's property. You call it madness, we call it survival. The courtroom's massive viewing screen flickered to life, showing peaceful green fields under a pale yellow sun. New Jeju colony looked nothing like the war-torn battlefields the council had been watching. Children played between rows of corn, while their parents worked the soil with their hands, the way humans had done for thousands of years before they reached the stars. Captain Lee Hyun appeared on screen, but he looked completely different. 20 years younger, with smooth skin and gentle eyes, he knelt beside neat rows of tomato plants. His wife, Park Soo-jin, worked nearby, her long black hair tied back as she carefully tended to seedlings in a greenhouse made of recycled ship parts. They moved together with the easy rhythm of people who had shared years of quiet mornings and simple work. I built that greenhouse with my own hands, Hyun said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence of the courtroom. Took me 3 months. Soo-jin laughed every time I hit my thumb with the hammer. The alien counselors watched this domestic scene with confusion. This peaceful farmer bore no resemblance to the scarred warrior sitting before them. Counselor Veltar leaned forward, his blue skin darkening with curiosity. You were a simple colonist. How does one transform from growing food to leading armies? The screen changed, showing orbital surveillance footage of New Jeju from space. The planet looked like a green and blue marble, perfect and untouched. Then the Dominion fleet arrived. Unlike human ships with their rough functional designs, these alien vessels were smooth and elegant, like deadly works of art floating in the vacuum of space. The Dominion doesn't fight the way we do, Hyun explained as the footage played. They don't land soldiers or demand surrender. They don't take prisoners or negotiate terms. They have a system that works perfectly every time. The watching aliens saw the system in action. Bright beams of energy lanced down from the ships, each one precisely targeted. They hit power stations, communication centers, hospitals, and schools, with mechanical precision. No wasted shots, no random destruction. Just calculated elimination of anything that might support organized resistance. First, they destroy all technology, Hyun continued, his voice steady but his hands clenched into fists. No power, no communications, no way to coordinate defense. Then they target anything that looks like leadership or organization. Government, buildings, police stations, military bases, even large gatherings of people. The screen showed Soo-jin running across their farm toward the old bomb shelter they had dug, as a precaution, but never thought they would need. She carried a small bag with their most precious belongings. Photos of their families back on Earth, her grandmother's ring, the seeds they had been saving for next season's planting. She never made it to the shelter. The energy beam that hit, their farm was no different from thousands of others falling across the planet that day. It didn't target her specifically. The Dominion computers probably calculated that the farm buildings might be used as shelter or supply storage. Soo-jin just happened to be running across the wrong piece of ground at the wrong moment. The bombardment lasted exactly 47 minutes, Hyun said. Long enough to eliminate 93% of the population and all major infrastructure, short enough to leave the planet suitable for immediate colonization. Very efficient. Several alien counselors nodded approvingly at the tactical precision. The Andromedans in particular seemed impressed by the mathematical elegance of the approach. Clean, quick, minimal resource expenditure, but the footage continued. It showed the survivors crawling out of basements and caves, maybe 7% of New Jeju's original population. Most species would have accepted defeat at this point. The Dominion had overwhelming superiority, orbital control, and could easily finish off any remaining resistance. Surrender would be logical. Instead, they watched Hyun dig through the smoking ruins of his greenhouse with his bare hands, searching for anything useful. He found a bent shovel, some lengths of pipe, and a few packets of seeds that had somehow survived the blast. Other survivors gathered around him, maybe 30 people total, all that remained of a farming community that had once numbered in the thousands. "This is when I learned something about humans that other species don't understand," Hyun said, watching his younger self organize the pathetic group of refugees. "We don't get weaker when we lose everything. We get angrier." The screen showed the next 5 years in fragments. Hyun and his people living in caves, learning to move at night, turning farm equipment into weapons. That bent shovel became a club that could crush alien skull plates. The irrigation pipes became projectile launchers. Even the seeds became weapons. They planted fast-growing vines that could tangle aircraft rotors and explosive fungi that released toxic spores when disturbed. "Other species calculate their chances and make rational decisions," Hyun explained. "When they face impossible odds, they surrender to minimize casualties. When they lose their homes, they accept relocation to preserve their lives. When their families die, they grieve and move forward." The footage showed a night raid on a Dominion supply depot. Hyun, now lean and scarred, led 12 other humans in an attack against 50 alien soldiers with superior weapons and equipment. By every mathematical calculation, the humans should have been wiped out in minutes. Instead, they won. "Humans don't think like that," Hyun said as the counselors watched in amazement. "When we have nothing left to lose, when victory becomes impossible, when everyone we love is dead, that's when we become most dangerous. Because at that point, we're not fighting to win anymore. We're fighting to make sure our enemies pay the highest possible price for what they took from us." The massive screen in the council chamber displayed a three-dimensional map of the Titan Gate system. The strategic importance was immediately clear to every military mind in the room. 3 major shipping lanes converged at this single point, making it the perfect choke point to control trade and troop movements across an entire sector of the galaxy. "The defense of Titan Gate," announced the prosecutor, "represents the most documented case of human military irrationality on record." The holographic display zoomed in on the gate itself, a massive ring of metal and energy that allowed ships to jump instantly between star systems. Around it floated the remnants of what had once been a thriving space station, now reduced to twisted metal, and scattered debris from the initial Dominion assault. Captain Hyun watched silently as the tactical overview appeared. His battalion had numbered exactly 437 soldiers when they first took position at the gate. The Dominion force approaching them consisted of over 15,000 troops, supported by 32 warships and enough firepower to level entire cities. "Any reasonable commander would have withdrawn immediately," stated Veltar, his blue skin rippling with confusion. The mathematical odds of success were essentially zero. The screen changed to show real-time footage from the battle's first day. Hyun's forces had scattered across the wreckage of the station using every piece of twisted metal as cover. They moved like ghosts through the debris field, appearing just long enough to fire a few shots before vanishing back into the maze of broken structures. Colonel Kim Min-ho appeared on screen, and several alien counselors made sounds of distress. His left arm was completely gone, severed at the shoulder by a plasma blast during the station's initial destruction. Instead of reporting to medical facilities like any sensible soldier, he had fashioned a sling to hold his remaining arm steady, and continued directing artillery strikes from a command post built inside a destroyed cargo container. Medical scans show that Colonel Kim was suffering from severe blood loss, shock, and infection from his wound, the prosecutor explained. Any member of a civilized species would have been unconscious within hours. Yet he remained at his post for the entire 6-day engagement. The footage showed Kim calmly calling out coordinates while medics worked around him, trying to stop his bleeding with whatever supplies they could scavenge. Every few minutes he would pause to vomit from the pain, then immediately return to his calculations. His remaining hand never stopped moving, marking targets on tactical displays even as his body began shutting down from trauma. "How is this possible?" whispered one of the Zephyrian delegates, her feathers ruffling with discomfort. The scene shifted to Lieutenant Choi Eun-bi, positioned in what had once been the station's observation deck. Shrapnel from an explosion had left deep cuts across her face, and her left eye was completely destroyed. Blood ran down her cheek in a steady stream, yet she continued operating a precision sniper rifle that required perfect depth perception and steady hands. Lieutenant Choi eliminated 47 enemy targets during the siege, Hyun said quietly. She couldn't see properly. Her hands were shaking from blood loss and she was fighting from positions that should have been impossible to hold. But she adapted. The footage showed Choi using her remaining eye with incredible precision, compensating for her lost depth perception by using sound and experience to judge distances. When her rifle's scope was damaged by enemy fire, she continued making accurate shots, using only the weapon's iron sights. Other human snipers, many of them wounded themselves, fed her information about wind conditions and target movements. "This is beyond biological possibility," declared the Centaurian military advisor. "Accurate marksmanship requires specific neurological functions that should have been compromised by her injuries." The most disturbing footage came from day 4 of the siege. Sergeant Yu Jae-sung had been caught in the blast when a Dominion missile penetrated the station's inner defenses. The explosion had broken 3 of his ribs and punctured his right lung. Medical equipment showed that he was breathing at less than 60% capacity, and each breath caused him obvious agony. Yet he continued fighting. The screen showed Yu leading a counterattack against Dominion forces that had broken through the outer perimeter. He moved carefully, taking shallow breaths to avoid aggravating his injuries, but he never stopped moving forward. When enemy soldiers took cover behind a barricade, he personally carried explosive charges to their position, placing them with steady hands despite the foam and blood he was coughing up. 18 consecutive hours of combat, the prosecutor announced. Medical analysis indicates that Sergeant Yu should have collapsed from oxygen deprivation within the first hour. Instead, he eliminated an estimated 80 enemy soldiers and personally destroyed 4 Dominion vehicles. The alien observers watched in horrified fascination as the footage continued. Human soldiers with broken bones used their weapons as crutches and kept fighting. Others with severe burns wrapped themselves in whatever cloth they could find and returned to their positions. Men and women who had lost significant amounts of blood continued operating complex equipment that required concentration and skill. Warring. Day 6, Hyun explained. "We had maybe 200 soldiers still capable of fighting. The Dominion still had over 8,000, but something had changed. The final footage showed Dominion troops hesitating before advancing, their movements becoming more cautious and uncertain. These were professional soldiers from a species that had conquered dozens of worlds, yet they were showing signs of genuine fear when facing humans they outnumbered 40 to 1. They couldn't understand what they were seeing," Hyun continued. "Their tactical computers kept predicting that we would collapse, that our wounded would stop fighting, that our morale would break. But we kept getting stronger." The screen showed the moment when the Dominion forces began their withdrawal. Not a full retreat. They still had overwhelming superiority and could have easily finished the job. But their commanders had made a calculation that the cost of victory was becoming too high. "They didn't retreat because we defeated them," Hyun said, his scarred face showing the faintest hint of a smile. "They retreated because they realized that killing humans isn't like killing other species. Every one of us they put down took 3 or 4 of them with us. Every position they captured cost them more than it was worth. We were turning their victory into a nightmare that would haunt them for generations." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Dominion hadn't been beaten by superior tactics or technology. They had been beaten by human refusal to accept the reality of defeat, by the terrifying realization that humans became more dangerous the closer they came to death. The atmosphere in the council chamber changed completely when Ambassador Theknal entered through the rear doors. Unlike the other alien representatives, Theknal belonged to no empire or federation. His species, the Wanderers, had given up their home worlds centuries ago to become neutral observers, traveling between star systems and documenting the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy. Theknal's appearance alone commanded respect. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with silver skin that seemed to shimmer with its own light, he moved with the careful dignity of someone who had witnessed the birth and death of entire species. His large dark eyes held the weight of knowledge that most beings preferred not to possess. "Honored Council," Theknal began, his voice carrying easily across the vast chamber without any need for amplification. "I come before you today not to defend or condemn Captain Lee Hyun, but to provide context that may change your understanding of this trial. The prosecutor, Kexrin, clicked his mandibles in annoyance. Ambassador, with respect, we have already reviewed extensive evidence of human brutality. What context could possibly justify their savage behavior? Theknal reached into his robes and produced a small crystalline data storage device. What I am about to show you has been classified at the highest levels of galactic intelligence for over a decade. Until now, only 3 species have possessed this information. The main viewing screen activated, showing a star map of the galaxy's outer rim. Dozens of star systems were marked in different colors: blue for inhabited worlds, red for contested territories, and an alarming number marked in black. These black markers represent something unprecedented in recorded galactic history, Theknal explained. Complete civilizational erasure. Counselor Veltar leaned forward, his blue skin darkening with concern. What do you mean by complete erasure? The screen zoomed in on one particular system, showing a lush green world orbiting a yellow star. The planet looked perfect for supporting life, with vast oceans, white clouds, and continents that showed clear signs of agriculture and urban development. This is the world of Kethmora, former home to the Singing People, Theknal said. They were a peaceful species known throughout the sector for their beautiful music and advanced medical technology. Their population numbered approximately 4 billion souls. The image changed, showing the same planet from a different angle. But something was wrong. The cities were different, the agricultural patterns had changed, and the orbital structures were completely alien in design. This is the same world 18 months after Dominion occupation, Theknal continued. What you see now are Dominion colonists who have been told that this planet has always been their ancestral home. They possess detailed historical records dating back thousands of years, complete with archaeological evidence, genetic records, and cultural artifacts. A murmur of confusion rippled through the council chamber. Several representatives began, speaking at once, their voices rising in disbelief and concern. That's impossible, declared the Andromedan's chief diplomat. You cannot fabricate an entire civilization's history. Theknal's expression remained grave. The Dominion has perfected something far beyond simple conquest. They don't just kill populations. They eliminate every trace that those populations ever existed. Physical infrastructure is rebuilt. Genetic material is scrubbed from the environment. Historical records are completely rewritten. The screen showed more examples. World after world that had once housed thriving civilizations now showed Dominion colonies with fabricated histories. The technology involved was staggering. Not just the ability to kill billions, but to remake entire worlds so thoroughly that the original inhabitants were forgotten as if they had never existed. The Whispering Winds of Altair 7, Theknal said, naming each lost civilization. The Crystal Builders of Proxima Beta, the Deep Dreamers of the Veil Nebula, 43 distinct species, each with their own languages, customs, art, and philosophy. All of them are gone so completely that most of the galaxy doesn't even remember they existed. Captain Hyun felt something cold settle in his stomach as he listened. This was worse than simple genocide. This was the complete annihilation of existence itself. Not just killing people, but erasing the very fact that they had ever lived. The Dominion's expansion follows a precise pattern, Theknal continued. They identify target worlds, conduct orbital sterilization, then spend 6 to 12 months completely rebuilding the planetary infrastructure. New colonists arrive believing they are returning to ancestral homes. Within a generation, the original inhabitants are not just dead, they are forgotten. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't conquest in any traditional sense. It was something far more horrifying. The systematic deletion of entire chapters from the story of galactic civilization. But something has disrupted this pattern, Theknal said, and for the first time his voice carried a note of what might have been hope. 3 years ago, the Dominion's expansion rate dropped by 70%. Instead of processing 4 to 6 worlds per year, they managed to complete erasure of only 2 systems. The screen changed to show tactical analysis charts, supply line maps, and resource allocation data stolen from Dominion networks. The cause of this disruption is humanity's resistance, Tecnol announced. Every human world that fights back, every colony that refuses to surrender, every ship that chooses to ram rather than retreat, it all forces the Dominion to commit resources to prolonged conflicts instead of quick erasures. Counselor Veltar's voice was barely a whisper. You're saying that human brutality is actually saving lives? I'm saying that human refusal to accept extinction is the only thing that has slowed the Dominion's advance, Tecnol replied. While you have been condemning their tactics as barbaric, they have been buying time for the rest of the galaxy to recognize the threat. The prosecutor Kexrin stood silent, his compound eyes reflecting the horror of what he was learning. Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species began to understand that they had been judging humanity by the wrong standards entirely. Captain Li Hyun and soldiers like him don't fight with such desperation because they enjoy violence, Tecnol concluded. They fight like that because they understand what defeat truly means. Not just death, not just conquest, but complete erasure from the universe itself. When surrender means that your species will be forgotten as if it never existed, any price becomes worth paying to prevent that fate. The council chamber that had once echoed with accusations of human brutality now buzzed with urgent whispers and rapid calculations. Representatives from 12 species huddled in small groups, their translators working overtime as they debated the implications of Ambassador Tecnol's revelation. The trial of Captain Li Hyun had transformed into something entirely different, a desperate war council planning the galaxy's survival. Counselor Veltar stood slowly, his blue skin now pale with understanding. Captain Li Hyun, this council formally withdraws all charges against you and your forces. We apologize for our ignorance. His voice carried the weight of genuine shame. We judged you for fighting like desperate animals when we should have asked why you felt such desperation was necessary. The formal acquittal took less than 10 minutes. What followed took 3 days of intense negotiation as the Galactic Council frantically restructured their entire military doctrine around a terrifying new reality. The Dominion wasn't just another expansionist empire. It was a force that could literally erase civilizations from existence itself. Within a week, Hyun found himself standing in an office that still smelled of fresh construction material, looking out at the newly established New Terra Military Academy. The facility had been built in record time on a neutral world, combining the best architects and engineers from dozens of species. But the real challenge wasn't constructing buildings. It was figuring out how to teach alien soldiers to fight like humans. The Zephyrians are having the most trouble, reported Colonel Park Jin-woo, Hyun's new second-in-command. Their entire military philosophy is based on preserving their forces and minimizing casualties. When we tell them to charge a heavily defended position, they calculate the odds and refuse to move. Hyun nodded, watching through the window as mixed species training units attempted their first joint exercises. A group of insectoid Cathani soldiers were practicing urban combat alongside human marines, but their natural instinct to retreat when faced with superior firepower kept disrupting the training scenarios. It's not about the tactics, Hyun said, quietly. It's about understanding why we fight the way we do. They're trying to learn our methods without understanding our motivation. The Academy's main lecture hall could hold over 1,000 students, and it was packed to capacity for Hyun's first address to the mixed species officer candidates. Humans sat next to towering centaurians, whose fur rippled nervously in the recycled air. Delicate Andromedans clustered together, their large eyes reflecting the overhead lights. Even some of the normally solitary wanderers had sent representatives to learn humanity's secrets. Hyun walked to the center of the raised platform, his scarred face visible to every being in the room. He had spent hours preparing a complex lecture about human psychology, evolutionary biology, and military history. Instead, he threw away his notes and spoke from the heart. Most of you are here because your governments want to understand how humans can fight so effectively against impossible odds, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. They want to know our secret techniques, our Special weapons, our advanced training methods. He paused, looking out at the hundreds of alien faces watching him intently. The truth is, we don't have any special secrets. We use the same weapons as everyone else, we train with the same methods, we face the same physical limitations. The only difference is what happens inside our heads when everything goes wrong. A young Zephyrian officer raised her wing hand. Captain, our military analysts have studied your combat footage extensively. Human soldiers continue fighting effectively even when suffering from injuries that should incapacitate them. How is this possible? Hyun smiled grimly. Fear is not your enemy. Cowardice is. Fear keeps you alive. Cowardice gets others killed. He began pacing across the platform, his movements those of a predator comfortable in its own territory. Every species in this room has evolved with the same basic survival instinct. When faced with overwhelming danger, you retreat to preserve your life. That's smart. That's rational. That keeps your species alive. The alien students nodded along, recognizing the truth of his words. But humans learned something different during our evolution. We discovered that sometimes running away doesn't save you. It just means you die tired. Sometimes the only way to survive is to make the thing trying to kill you decide that the cost isn't worth it. The screen behind him activated, showing footage from recent training exercises. Lieutenant Kang So-ra appeared, leading a mixed unit of humans and aliens through a simulated Dominion stronghold. The exercise was designed to be nearly impossible: overwhelming enemy numbers, superior defensive positions, and limited ammunition for the attacking force. Watch Lieutenant Kang's team, Hyun instructed. Notice how the alien soldiers move. The footage showed the alien team members advancing cautiously, using proper cover and fire discipline. When they encountered heavy resistance, they fell back to regroup and reassess. It was textbook military tactics, exactly what any competent officer would do. But then the scenario changed. The simulation announced that retreat was impossible. Dominion reinforcements had cut off their escape route. Now the mixed unit faced the same choice that humans encountered in every real battle: fight through or die where they stood. This is where everything changes, Hyun said softly. On screen, the alien soldiers initially froze with indecision. Their tactical computers were telling them that advance was suicide, but retreat was no longer possible. For crucial seconds, they simply crouched behind cover, paralyzed by an impossible situation. Then they heard Lieutenant Kang's voice, not shouting orders but speaking with calm certainty. We go forward together, or we die here alone. Your choice. What happened next would have been impossible to predict based on any previous analysis of alien military behavior. The Zephyrian officer suddenly spread her wings and charged directly at the strongest enemy position, screaming a human battle cry she had learned phonetically. The Cathani soldiers followed, their mandibles clicking in rhythm with the war chant. Even the cautious Andromedans abandoned cover and joined the assault. They're not fighting like their species anymore, observed one of the watching instructors. They're fighting like humans. The simulation ended with complete success. The mixed unit had achieved an objective that should have been mathematically impossible. But more importantly, they had discovered something about themselves that their own species had never taught them. In the end, Hyun concluded his lecture. Humanity's gift to the galaxy isn't superior technology or tactics. It's a simple idea that seems obvious once you understand it. Some things are worth dying for, and sometimes the willingness to die is exactly what allows life to continue. 6 months later, Lieutenant Kang So-ra led the first mixed species Special Operations Unit against an actual Dominion outpost. As plasma fire erupted around them and the odds turned desperate, she heard her alien teammates shouting human battle cries in their own languages, pushing forward despite their terror, refusing to let extinction claim another world without a fight. The galaxy had learned to fight like humans. And for the first time in years, the Dominion's expansion came to a complete halt.